Opening cans can be quite a problem, but now there's new Magican from WL by locating itself on the rim, cleanly and safely removing the entire lid without you even touching it, then ejecting automatically.
The can opener that came 50 years late. Chapter 1. The invention. Nobody could open. In 1810, a British merchant named Peter Durand received a patent for a revolutionary food preservation method, sealing food in metal containers. These cans could keep meat, vegetables, and other perishables edible for months or even years. It was a breakthrough that would transform food storage and distribution. There was just one problem. The cans weighed more than the food inside them. The metal was thick, sometimes nearly a quarter-inch of iron, and the patent included absolutely no instructions for opening them. The first cans were formidable objects. They were hand-soldered by tinsmiths with thick seams and heavy construction. Some weighed several pounds when empty. They were designed to be indestructible, to withstand rough handling during shipping and storage, and they succeeded. They were extremely durable. So durable, in fact, that getting the food out required significant effort and often specialized tools that most people didn't own. Early can labels sometimes included helpful instructions. Cut round the top near the outer edge with a chisel and hammer. This wasn't metaphorical. You literally needed a chisel and hammer to open your dinner. Imagine the scene. A housewife in 1820 standing in her kitchen, a can of preserved beef on the counter, a hammer and chisel in hand. She positions the chisel at the can's edge and strikes it with the hammer. The metal dents. She strikes again and again. Slowly, through repeated blows, she creates a rough opening. The process took time and produced sharp, jagged edges. Injuries were common. Cut fingers, sliced palms from the razor-sharp metal edges left by the violent opening process. The food inside often became contaminated with metal shavings or debris from the can itself. Some people used bayonets if they had them. Military surplus from the Napoleonic Wars meant many households had old weapons that proved useful for piercing cans. Others used pocket knives, though this often broke or dulled the blades. The wealthy could afford specialized tools. Blacksmiths created heavy cutting implements specifically for cans, essentially small axes or reinforced chisels. But these were expensive and not widely available. For most people, brute force was the solution. Place the can on a sturdy surface. Strike it with something heavy until it dented and eventually punctured. Then work at the opening until you could extract the contents. It was crude, dangerous, and frustrating. Yet despite this absurd difficulty, canned food became increasingly popular through the early 1800s. The benefits were simply too valuable to ignore. Food that didn't spoil, provisions that could be stored indefinitely, the ability to eat vegetables in winter or meat without slaughtering animals. The British Navy adopted canned food enthusiastically. Sailors on long voyages needed food that wouldn't rot, and canned provisions solved that problem. Never mind that opening the cans required tools you typically use in a workshop rather than a kitchen. Explorers carried canned food on expeditions. Arctic explorers, in particular, relied on canned provisions when fresh food was impossible to obtain. The cans were heavy and awkward, but they were better than starvation. So for 50 years, this absurd situation persisted. Canned food was manufactured and sold in increasing quantities. People bought it, took it home, and then struggled violently to open it. The solution, a simple, dedicated can opener, seemed obvious in retrospect, but it didn't exist and wouldn't For half a century, the can came first. The can opener came much, much later. If you love stories of the past, the kind that remind us how small inventions shaped the world, consider subscribing. We make these videos free so you can fall asleep learning something new about history. Your support helps us keep these quiet stories alive. Now let's get back to the video. Chapter 2. Why the delay? The 50-year gap between the invention of canned food and the can opener seems inexplicable. How could such an obvious need go unaddressed for so long? The answer reveals surprising things about innovation, markets, and how technologies develop. First, the market for canned food was initially small and specialized. In the early 1800s, canning was expensive. Only the military, explorers, and wealthy households could afford canned provisions. For this limited market, the opening difficulty wasn't a critical problem. Military personnel had access to tools. Ships carried tool chests with chisels and hammers. Soldiers had knives and bayonets. The inconvenience of opening cans was minor compared to the value of preserved food on long campaigns or voyages. Wealthy households had servants and well-equipped kitchens. A cook with proper tools could manage opening cans, even if it took some effort. The difficulty was accepted as the price of convenience. Second, the cans themselves were evolving. Early cans were extraordinarily thick and heavy because manufacturing techniques were crude. Tinsmiths hand-soldered each can, and quality varied wildly. Thick metal was safer. It prevented leaks and spoilage, even if it made opening difficult. As manufacturing improved through the 1820s and 1830s, cans became thinner and lighter. This made them slightly easier to open with conventional tools, reducing the urgency of developing a specialized opener. Third, there was a chicken and egg problem. Can openers wouldn't sell well unless canned food was common. But canned food couldn't become common, couldn't reach mass markets, until opening them was easier. Neither side had sufficient incentive to move first. Inventors did try. Several patents for can opening devices were filed in the 1820s and 1830s. But these early designs were impractical, too complex, too expensive, or simply ineffective. They failed to gain traction because the market wasn't ready. The breakthrough required several simultaneous developments. Canning needed to become cheaper and more widespread. Can manufacturing needed to advance, so cans were thinner and more standardized. And consumer demand needed to grow to a point where a mass-market can opener made economic sense. These convergences happened slowly through the mid-1800s. Canning technology improved dramatically after 1846, when Henry Evans invented a machine that could produce can bodies mechanically rather than by hand. This reduced costs and increased production speed. Can designs became more standardized. Instead of each tinsmith creating unique shapes and sizes, manufacturers began producing consistent cans that all opened similarly. This standardization made a universal can opener more feasible. Consumer markets were expanding too. The middle class was growing. More households had discretionary income to spend on convenience foods. Railways were expanding, creating distribution networks that could carry canned goods to wider markets. But perhaps most importantly, the cultural attitude toward canned food was shifting. In the early 1800s, preserved food was viewed with suspicion. Fresh was better. Canning was for emergencies or situations where fresh food was impossible. By the 1850s, canning was becoming normalized. Urban populations couldn't easily access fresh food from farms. Seasonal foods could be enjoyed year-round through canning. The stigma was fading, replaced by appreciation for convenience. This created the conditions for the can opener to finally emerge. The market was ready, the technology was ready, and the need was undeniable. Millions of cans were being sold annually, all requiring violent methods to open. Multiple inventors responded simultaneously. In the late 1850s, several can opener designs appeared, each approaching the problem differently. The race was on to create the definitive solution to a problem that had persisted for half a century. The delay wasn't simple oversight or stupidity. It was the complex interplay of market forces, technological constraints, and cultural attitudes. Innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It requires the right conditions, the right timing, the right convergence of factors. The can opener's time had finally come, and when it arrived, it would transform how people accessed their food, completing the revolution that canned food had started 50 years earlier. Chapter 3. The First Openers. In 1858, Ezra Warner of Waterbury, Connecticut, patented the first true can opener designed specifically for opening cans. It looked nothing like the can openers we know today. It resembled a combination of a bayonet and a sickle, a pointed blade to pierce the can and a curved blade to saw around the edge. Warner's opener was functional but dangerous. The piercing blade was sharp enough to puncture thick metal, which meant it could easily puncture flesh too. The sawing motion required significant strength and care. One slip could result in a serious cut. Despite these drawbacks, Warner's opener was revolutionary. For the first time, you could open a can without a hammer. The design was sold to grocers, not individual consumers. Shopkeepers would open cans for customers who purchased them, a service that made canned goods more accessible. The U.S. Army adopted Warner's opener during the Civil War. Millions were manufactured and distributed to Union soldiers. Canned rations became standard military provisions, and Warner's opener made them accessible in field conditions without requiring workshop tools. After the war, thousands of soldiers returned home familiar with both canned food and can openers. This military experience created a generation of consumers who expected canned goods to be openable without extreme effort, driving civilian demand for better opening solutions. Other inventors were developing alternatives. In 1870, William Lyman patented a rotary can opener, a design much closer to modern openers. It featured a cutting wheel that rolled around the can's rim, guided by a serrated wheel that gripped the edge. This was safer and more efficient than Warner's blade design. Lyman's opener required both hands and some practice, but it produced a relatively smooth cut and was much less likely to cause injury. Crucially, it was affordable enough for home use. Middle-class families could purchase their own can openers rather than relying on grocers. The rotary principle became the foundation for can opener design. Subsequent improvements refined Lyman's basic concept rather than replacing it. The cutting wheel was improved. The grip mechanism was enhanced. Handles were added for better leverage. By the 1880s, can openers were becoming common kitchen implements. They hung on hooks near the stove or were stored in drawers alongside knives and other utensils. Opening a can was still more difficult than it is today, but it no longer required tools from a workshop. The church key style opener appeared in the 1890s, a simple, cheap design that could pierce cans and pry off bottle caps. These were often given away as promotional items by breweries and canned goods manufacturers. Almost free to produce, they proliferated rapidly. Church keys couldn't produce smooth cuts. They left jagged edges and required working your way around the can's perimeter with repeated piercings. But they were portable, virtually indestructible, and required no skill to use. For basic can opening, they were sufficient. Electric can openers appeared in the 1930s, but didn't become common until the 1950s. Early electric models were expensive and considered luxury items. They appealed mainly to people with arthritis or limited hand strength who struggled with manual openers. The manual rotary opener remained standard through the mid-20th century. The design was perfected through incremental improvements: better cutting wheels, more comfortable handles, enhanced gripping mechanisms. By the 1960s, a good manual can opener could smoothly open any standard can in seconds. But the fundamental problem had been solved back in 1858 with Warner's crude but functional design. The 50-year wait for a can opener had ended. The technology caught up with the need, and opening cans transformed from an arduous task to a simple kitchen chore. The evolution from Warner's dangerous blade through Lyman's rotary design to modern openers followed typical technological progression. Initial solutions that barely work, followed by gradual refinement until the tool becomes efficient, safe, and ubiquitous. What took 50 years to begin took another century to perfect. But the crucial step, acknowledging that cans needed dedicated opening tools, had finally been taken. The age of hammers and chisels was ending. The modern can opener had arrived. Chapter 4. Inside the can. While inventors struggled to create can openers, the food inside the cans was undergoing its own evolution. Early canned food was nutritious, but often unappetizing, and the canning process itself was mysterious and sometimes dangerous. The preservation principle was simple: heating food to kill bacteria and sealing it in airtight containers prevented spoilage. But in the early 1800s, nobody understood why this worked. The germ theory of disease hadn't been developed yet. Canners knew their process preserved food, but not the mechanism. This ignorance led to inconsistent results. Some cans preserved perfectly for years, others spoiled within months, bulging ominously as bacteria produced gas inside. Without understanding the science, canners couldn't reliably prevent contamination. The food itself varied wildly in quality. Meat canned in 1810 might be from animals slaughtered months earlier, already partially spoiled before canning. Vegetables were often overcooked during the canning process, losing texture and flavor. The long heating times required to ensure sterilization turned many foods to mush. Taste was often poor. The metal cans sometimes imparted a metallic flavor to food, particularly acidic items like tomatoes. The high heat used in processing could create off flavors, and the long storage times meant canned food often tasted distinctly different from fresh. But for situations where fresh food was impossible, long sea voyages, military campaigns, polar expeditions, canned food was miraculous. It prevented scurvy, provided protein and calories, and meant the difference between survival and starvation. The British Navy's adoption of canned food led to some of the earliest quality scandals. In 1852, it was discovered that some naval provisions had been canned years earlier and were badly contaminated. Sailors had consumed spoiled food, leading to illness and outrage. Investigation revealed shocking practices. Some canners were reusing old cans, merely resealing them with new food. Others were using meat from diseased animals, relying on the canning process to make it safe. The scandal led to stricter regulations and inspection procedures. Lead poisoning was another serious problem. Cans were sealed with lead solder, and the lead could leach into acidic foods. This was particularly dangerous for items like fruits and tomatoes. Chronic lead exposure from canned food contributed to health problems, though the connection wasn't fully understood at the time. Some historians now believe that lead poisoning from canned food contributed to the failure of the Franklin expedition to the Arctic in 1845. The expedition carried thousands of cans sealed with lead solder. Analysis of remains suggests expedition members suffered lead poisoning, which may have impaired judgment and contributed to the disaster. Advances in canning technology gradually addressed these problems. The development of tin-plated cans with minimal lead reduced poisoning risks. Better heating processes improved food quality and safety. Understanding of bacteria and sterilization led to more reliable preservation. By the late 1800s, canned food quality was improving dramatically. Brands like Campbell's Soup, founded 1869, and Heinz, founded 1869, built reputations on consistency and quality. They established strict standards and quality control procedures that made canned foods reliable and safe. The variety of canned foods expanded too. Early canning focused on meat and vegetables. By the 1880s, fruits, fish, condensed milk, and even complete meals were being canned. The technology that had initially served military and maritime needs was becoming a consumer convenience. Labeling improved, providing consumers with information about contents, canning date, and manufacturer. This transparency built trust and allowed consumers to make informed choices. Brands mattered. People learned which canners produced quality products and remained loyal to them. The can itself was evolving. The extremely thick, heavy cans of the 1810s gave way to thinner, tin-plated steel. These were lighter, cheaper to produce, and easier to open, though still challenging without proper tools. The standardization of can sizes made stocking and storage more practical. By 1900, canned food was a normal part of the diet for many Americans and Europeans. The novelty had worn off, replaced by mundane familiarity. Cans sat in pantries alongside fresh ingredients, used when convenient or when fresh wasn't available. The food inside had gone from barely edible preservation to reasonably palatable convenience. Not as good as fresh in most cases, but acceptable, reliable, and increasingly affordable. The can had become what its inventors envisioned, a practical solution to food preservation. But it had taken nearly a century to get there, and for the first 50 years, that practical solution had been locked inside metal containers that required violence to access. The inside and the outside of the can had finally caught up with each other. The technology was complete. Chapter 5. The military connection. The relationship between canned food and the military was symbiotic from the beginning. Armies needed portable, non-perishable food. Canners needed reliable, large-scale customers. This partnership drove the development of both canning and can-opening technology. Napoleon Bonaparte was indirectly responsible for the invention of canned food. In 1795, the French military offered a prize for anyone who could develop a method to preserve food for armies on the march. Nicholas Appert won the prize in 1809 with his method of sealing food in glass jars and heating them. Peter Durand adapted Appert's method to metal containers, creating the first cans in 1810. The British military immediately saw the potential and began purchasing canned provisions for the Royal Navy and Army. Military requirements shaped early can design. Cans needed to survive rough handling during transport, loaded onto ships, thrown into wagons, dropped on cobblestones. This demanded thick, durable construction, even though it made opening difficult. The military expected soldiers and sailors to have tools. Knives were standard equipment. Many soldiers carried bayonets or other implements that could puncture and open cans. The inconvenience of opening was considered acceptable given the alternative, spoiled food or starvation. Military adoption of canned food accelerated during the Crimean War, 1853-1856. Both British and French forces relied heavily on canned provisions. The logistics of feeding armies in the Crimean Peninsula, far from supply bases, made canned food essential. This massive military demand drove improvements in canning technology. Manufacturers scaled up production. Processes became more efficient. Quality generally improved, though problems persisted. Some Crimean War provisions were poorly canned and caused illness. The American Civil War, 1861-1865, was perhaps the pivotal moment for canned food and can openers. The Union Army purchased millions of cans of preserved food, meat, vegetables, condensed milk, fruit. Feeding armies of hundreds of thousands required industrial-scale food preservation. Ezra Warner's can opener, patented in 1858, was adopted by the Union Army and mass-produced. Soldiers learned to use Warner's opener in camps and on battlefields. After the war, these veterans returned home with familiarity with both canned food and the tools to open it. This wartime experience created a huge consumer market. Men who'd lived on canned rations for years had lost any stigma about preserved food. They knew how to open cans. They expected grocers to stock canned goods. This demand drove the civilian canning industry's expansion after 1865. European militaries continued to be major customers through the late 1800s and early 1900s. Colonial wars in Africa and Asia required provisioning troops far from Europe. Canned food was the practical solution, and military procurement funded ongoing improvements. World War I brought canned food to unprecedented scale. Millions of soldiers in trenches across Europe relied on canned rations. Bully beef, canned, corned beef, became infamous. Soldiers ate it constantly, grew to hate it, but survived on it. The military demand during WWI drove innovations in can manufacturing and opening. Cans became more standardized. Opening mechanisms improved. The P-38 and P-51 military can openers, small, simple, effective designs, were developed and issued to soldiers by the millions. These military openers were marvels of practical design. Tiny, lightweight, nearly indestructible. They could open any standard can. Soldiers learned to use them quickly and kept them as mementos after the war. Many civilians acquired surplus military can openers, which often outlasted commercial alternatives. World War II continued this pattern. C rations and K rations in cans fed American forces worldwide. The military's need for compact, durable, long-lasting food drove further refinements. Post-war, surplus military canned goods flooded civilian markets, and veterans' familiarity with canned food sustained commercial demand. The military connection gradually faded as civilian markets grew. By the 1960s, commercial canning far exceeded military production. But the military had been the crucial early adopter, sustaining the industry through its difficult early decades and driving the innovations that made canned food practical. Without military demand, canning might have remained a niche technology for wealthy households and specialized applications. The military's need for portable, non-perishable food created the market that allowed canning to develop, scale up, and eventually reach everyday consumers. And the military's acceptance of difficult can opening methods, soldiers were expected to have knives and tools, delayed the development of consumer-friendly openers. Why develop an easy opener when your main customers were soldiers who could manage with bayonets? When civilian markets finally grew large enough to matter, the can opener's time had come. But the military had sustained the industry through 50 years of hammer and chisel opening. For better or worse, armies made canned food possible. Chapter 6: The Grocery Revolution. The spread of canned food fundamentally transformed grocery shopping and kitchen practices. Before canning, buying food meant daily trips to markets for perishables. After canning, you could stock a pantry with provisions that lasted months. Early grocery stores in the 1800s were quite different from modern supermarkets. They were small shops where clerks retrieved items for customers from shelves and storage areas. You didn't browse. You told the clerk what you wanted, and they assembled your order. Canned goods fit awkwardly into this system. The cans were heavy, expensive, and difficult to open. Many grocers offered can opening services, using specialized tools to open cans for customers who purchased them. This was necessary because most households lacked the tools to open cans themselves. This service model limited canned foods' growth. You couldn't buy cans to store at home unless you had opening tools. The grocers became gatekeepers, controlling access to the food inside the cans they sold. The development of affordable can openers in the 1870s and 1880s changed this dynamic. Suddenly, consumers could purchase cans and open them at home. This enabled bulk buying and pantry stocking. You could buy multiple cans at once, store them, and use them as needed. Canned goods began to displace some fresh foods in grocers' stock. Why carry fresh peas that spoiled quickly when you could stock canned peas that lasted indefinitely? Canned goods reduced waste and enabled grocers to offer consistent selection year-round. Branding became important. Early cans were often unlabeled or minimally marked. As the market grew, manufacturers like Campbell's, Heinz, and Del Monte created distinctive labels and built brand recognition. Consumers learned to trust specific brands for quality and consistency. The grocery store evolved to accommodate canned goods. Dedicated shelving displayed cans with labels facing out. Grocers organized cans by type: vegetables together, meats together, fruits together. The modern grocery aisle was beginning to take shape. Pricing for canned goods was initially high. Canning was expensive, and cans were costly to produce and ship. But as production scaled up and processes improved, prices fell. By the 1890s, canned goods were affordable for middle-class households, if not cheap. The variety expanded dramatically. In the 1810s, canning was limited to basic meat and vegetables. By the 1890s, you could buy canned soups, fruits, fish, condensed milk, beans, tomatoes, corn, and dozens of other items. The can had become a universal food container. Seasonal eating patterns shifted. Before canning, you ate what was available: strawberries in summer, apples in fall, stored root vegetables in winter. Canning made seasonal foods available year-round. You could eat tomatoes in January if you bought canned ones. This year-round availability changed cooking. and diet. Recipes that required specific ingredients became feasible any time. Regional cuisines spread more easily when ingredients could be canned and shipped. Food became less tied to local seasons and agriculture. The labor involved in food preparation changed too. Before canning, preparing vegetables meant washing, peeling, chopping, time-consuming work. Canned vegetables were already prepared, requiring only heating. This saved time, particularly valuable as more women entered the workforce. Cookbooks began including recipes specifically designed for canned ingredients. Campbell's Soup Company famously promoted recipes using their condensed soups as ingredients in other dishes, creating an entirely new category of convenience cooking. By the early 1900s, a well-stocked pantry included numerous canned goods. The pantry itself became more important in home design, a cool, dark space for storing cans alongside other preserved foods. The pantry was your private grocery, stocked with items that wouldn't spoil. The Great Depression accelerated canned food adoption. When money was tight, canned goods offered economy, no waste from spoilage, portion control, ability to buy in bulk when prices were low. The can became associated with thrift and practical household management. World War II brought rationing, and canned goods were often rationed items. Having a well-stocked pantry of canned foods became patriotic preparation, not hoarding. Government campaigns encouraged citizens to can their own foods at home, supplementing commercial canned goods. Post-war prosperity in the 1950s brought the suburban supermarket, huge stores with vast selections, including entire aisles of canned goods. The modern grocery shopping experience, wheeling a cart through aisles of packaged foods, was becoming standard. The grocery revolution was complete. Shopping had transformed from daily purchases of fresh perishables to weekly trips to stock pantries with canned and packaged goods. The can had enabled this transformation, changing not just what people bought, but how they shopped and how they thought about food storage. And at the center of this revolution was the can opener, the tool that finally made canned goods truly accessible. Without it, the grocery revolution would have stalled. With it, canned food became an ordinary part of everyday life. Chapter 7. The Absurdity in Retrospect. Looking back, the 50-year gap between canned food and can openers seems almost comically absurd. How could such an obvious problem go unsolved for so long? The answer reveals how often innovation is messy, illogical, and disconnected from what seems obvious in hindsight. Imagine being a historian in the year 2150, looking back at early 21st century technology. You discover that smartphones existed for 15 years before someone invented a truly usable voice interface, or that electric cars were invented in 1890 but didn't become practical until 2010. Such gaps might seem inexplicable. The can and opener gap is similar. From our perspective, it's obvious that canned food needs an opener. But from the perspective of someone in 1810, it wasn't obvious at all. Canned food was new, unfamiliar. The concept of a specialized, single-purpose tool for opening them hadn't yet emerged. People in the early 1800s were accustomed to using general-purpose tools for multiple tasks. The same knife that cut food also opened letters and sharpened pencils. The same hammer that drove nails also opened cans. The idea of a dedicated can opener seemed unnecessary when existing tools, however awkwardly, could do the job. The threshold for good enough was different too. Modern consumers expect convenience. We're frustrated when technology doesn't work perfectly immediately. 19th century consumers were more patient with imperfection. If opening a can took 5 minutes of effort, that was inconvenient but acceptable. The economic calculation was different as well. Canned food was expensive. If you were paying premium prices for canned provisions, you probably owned tools or could afford to pay a grocer to open cans for you. The market that would demand cheap, easy can openers, working-class consumers buying affordable canned goods, didn't exist yet. There's also the problem of innovation visibility. Major inventions like the steam engine or telegraph captured public imagination and attracted investment. Can openers, however, were mundane, unglamorous. Inventors focused on exciting, prestigious problems, not kitchen tools. The 50-year gap reveals something important about how technology evolves. Innovations don't happen in logical order. We assume that invention A, canned food, would immediately be followed by invention B, can opener, because B makes A more useful. But markets don't work that way. Sometimes the sequence is reversed. The solution appears before the problem is widely recognized. Other times, both appear simultaneously. Often, neither appears for years because the necessary conditions, market size, manufacturing capability, consumer demand, haven't aligned. The can opener had to wait for multiple developments: cheaper canning, mass production of standardized cans, a large consumer market, and inventors willing to tackle the problem. Until all these factors aligned, the gap persisted. There's poetic justice in the absurdity. Canned food was invented to solve a serious problem, preserving food for armies and ships. But the solution created a new problem: accessing the food. This secondary problem then required its own solution, which took 50 years to develop adequately. This pattern repeats throughout technological history. Automobiles were invented before good roads existed for them. Electricity was available before most homes had wiring. The internet existed before user-friendly browsers. Innovation is rarely neat or logical. The hammer and chisel era of can opening is a reminder that technological progress isn't smooth or inevitable. It's messy, full of gaps and overlaps, driven by complex forces that don't always produce optimal outcomes quickly. And yet, the gap closed eventually. The problem was recognized, inventors responded, and solutions emerged. The market corrected the absurdity. By 1900, cans and can openers had caught up with each other, and the bizarre hammer era was ending. What remains is the story, a tale of inexplicable delay, violent food access, and eventual correction. It's humorous in retrospect, horrifying if you imagine actually needing to hammer open your dinner. But it's also very human. We create solutions that create problems. We overlook obvious needs. We accept absurd workarounds until someone finally develops something better. And then we wonder why it took so long. The 50-year gap between cans and can openers isn't really about cans. It's about how innovation works, slowly, messily, irrationally, until suddenly it doesn't, until the pieces align and the obvious solution finally emerges. And then we look back and laugh at how long we lived with the absurdity. Hammers, for 50 years, to open dinner. In 2150, our descendants will probably laugh at similar absurdities from our era. Technologies we accept as good enough will seem bizarrely primitive. Problems we've overlooked will seem glaringly obvious. Such is the nature of progress. The future always makes the past look foolish. The can opener makes the hammer look ridiculous. And somewhere, inevitably, we're currently using hammers for problems that have simple solutions we just haven't invented yet. Chapter 8. The Modern Can Opener. By the 1960s, the can opener had reached a form of perfection. The basic rotary design had been refined through decades of small improvements. Handles were ergonomically shaped. Cutting wheels were precisely manufactured from hardened steel. The gripping mechanism was reliable and smooth. A good manual can opener in 1965 could open any standard can in seconds with minimal effort. The cutting wheel would pierce the can's edge. The rotary mechanism would guide it smoothly around the rim, and you'd lift away the lid with relatively smooth edges. Not perfectly safe, but far better than the jagged tears of earlier eras. Electric can openers had become common wedding gifts and kitchen accessories. Plug it in, position the can, press a lever, and the opener would automatically cut around the rim. For people with arthritis or limited hand strength, they were genuinely helpful. For everyone else, they were convenient luxury. But both manual and electric openers shared a flaw. They cut through the can's top edge, leaving the lid inside the can with sharp edges that could cut fingers during removal. The lid was also contaminated. The cutting wheel, used on many cans, could transfer bacteria. The safety can opener appeared in the 1980s, addressing these problems. Instead of cutting through the lid, it cut the seal between the lid and the can body. This left smooth edges and a removable lid that hadn't been contaminated by the cutting mechanism. These safety openers took some getting used to. The technique was different, and they required more precision to position correctly. But once mastered, they were clearly superior, eliminating most cut finger incidents and producing much safer results. The pull-tab can, invented by Emil Fraise in 1959, challenged the can opener's necessity for certain products. Beer and soda came in pull-tab cans that opened without tools. By the 1970s, pull-tabs were standard for beverages, eliminating the need for church key openers. Pull-tabs created their own problems. They detached completely and became litter. The stay tab, which remained attached to the can, solved this in the 1980s. These are the tabs we use today. Fold it back, and the can opens. No separate tool required. Food cans adopted similar easy open technology more slowly. Tuna, soup, and other canned foods began appearing with pull tabs in the 1990s and 2000s. These pop-top cans eliminated the need for can openers entirely for some products. But the traditional can persists, particularly for products where a full circumference seal is important, or where pull tabs would be impractical. Large cans of vegetables, industrial-size cans of sauce, pet food cans, these still require openers. The multi-tool revolution brought tiny can openers to pocket knives and keychain tools. These miniature openers use the church key principle, a simple pointed blade that pierces and levers. They're not elegant, but they work in emergencies. Smart kitchen appliances brought automatic can openers with sensors, safety features, and one-touch operation. Some can detect can size and adjust automatically. Others can open multiple cans sequentially without intervention. These are engineering marvels, though arguably over-designed for a simple task. The manual rotary can opener remains the standard in most kitchens. Despite electric alternatives and easy open cans, the simple hand-powered opener endures. It's reliable, requires no electricity, occupies minimal space, and works perfectly well with practice. Can opener design has reached an endpoint. similar to other perfected tools. Like hammers or scissors, the basic form is so optimized that further improvement is marginal. You can make a can opener slightly smoother, marginally more comfortable, but you can't fundamentally improve on the core mechanism. This represents the complete arc from 1810 to today. From no opener to crude blade openers, to refined rotary designs, to electric automation, to easy open cans that need no opener at all. The full evolution of a technology, from desperate need to elegant solution to potential obsolescence. Yet the can opener persists. In kitchen drawers worldwide, manual can openers wait for the cans that still need opening. They're so ordinary, so taken for granted, that most people couldn't describe how they work despite using them regularly. This invisibility through perfection is the ultimate success for a tool. When something works so reliably that you never think about it, when it disappears into the background of daily life, when it's so well designed that using it requires no thought, that's when design has truly succeeded. The modern can opener achieved this. It solved the problem so completely that the problem disappeared from consciousness. We open cans without considering the century plus of development that made it easy. The tool that came 50 years late has been here for over 150 years. It evolved, improved, and became so successful that we barely notice it. And that quiet success is the perfect ending to the story of the can opener, from hammers to invisibility, from violence to ease, from absurd gap to ubiquitous solution. The can opener's journey is complete. Chapter 9. The Collectors and the Curious. In antique shops and online marketplaces, you can find hundreds of vintage can openers. These aren't just old tools. They're artifacts of the evolution we've traced, physical evidence of decades of gradual improvement and occasional innovation. Collectors seek out Warner's original bayonet-style openers from the 1850s. These are rare and valuable, particularly those with documented Civil War provenance. Soldiers carried these openers through campaigns, and some survive with fascinating histories attached to them. The rotary openers from the 1870s through the early 1900s are common enough to be affordable, but interesting enough to be collectible. Each manufacturer had distinctive designs, different handle shapes, cutting wheel configurations, mounting mechanisms. Collectors can date openers by these features. Advertising can openers are particularly sought after. Church key-style openers given away by breweries, soda companies, and canned goods manufacturers. These promotional items featured company names and logos, making them miniature billboards. Collecting them is collecting advertising history. Military can openers, particularly the P-38 and P-51, have cult followings. These tiny, simple tools are marvels of functional design, and veterans often kept theirs for decades. Some people collect variants from different eras or different countries' militaries. The stranger devices attract attention too. There were combination can opener and ice picks, can opener and bottle opener multi-tools, wall-mounted can openers for commercial kitchens. Each represents someone's attempt to improve or expand on the basic can opening function. Electric can openers from the 1940s and 1950s are collectible mid-century design objects. Their streamlined housings, chrome finishes, and optimistic aesthetics capture the post-war faith in electrical appliances, making life easier. They're beautiful even when non-functional. What attracts people to collecting can openers? Partly, it's the same impulse that drives any specialized collecting, the the thrill of finding rare variants, the pleasure of completing sets, the satisfaction of expertise in a narrow domain. But can opener collectors often speak about the objects representing everyday history? These weren't prestigious items or luxury goods. They were ordinary tools used in ordinary kitchens by ordinary people. Collecting them is preserving the history of daily life. Some collectors focus on the mechanical ingenuity. The rotary can opener is genuinely clever engineering. The way the cutting wheel and feed wheel work together, how leverage is applied, how the design accommodates different concises. Understanding and appreciating this design is its own reward. Museums occasionally display can openers as part of kitchen history or industrial design exhibits. The evolution from crude blade to refined rotary to electric to easy open demonstrates technological progress in microcosm. It's a teaching tool about innovation and human problem solving. Online communities of can opener enthusiasts share information, trade items, and discuss obscure details of different designs. These communities are small but passionate, united by appreciation for an overlooked tool. The historical importance of can openers is usually underestimated. They're not glamorous like automobiles or dramatic like airplanes, but they enabled the preserved food industry to reach mass markets, changed grocery shopping and cooking practices, and eliminated a genuine hardship from daily life. Some historians argue that the can opener's availability was crucial to urbanization. Cities require food to be brought in from elsewhere. Urban populations can't feed themselves through local agriculture. Preserved food, made accessible by can openers, helped make large cities viable. The military implications are also significant. Portable, non-perishable food, enabled by canning and made accessible by openers, changed warfare. Armies could operate farther from supply bases, move faster, campaign in seasons previously impossible. From this perspective, the humble can opener is historically important, not a revolutionary invention like the steam engine, but an enabling technology that made other developments possible. Its very ordinariness obscures its significance. Collectors and historians preserving can openers are preserving evidence of this history. Each variant, each design iteration, each manufacturer's approach, these tell stories about industrial development, consumer needs, and how everyday problems were gradually solved. The absurdity of the 50-year gap makes the story more compelling. The fact that people struggled for generations with a problem that seems simple now is humbling. It reminds us that what seems obvious in retrospect wasn't obvious to people living through it. And collectors find particular delight in the early openers, the awkward, dangerous, barely functional tools that were nevertheless vast improvements over hammers and chisels. These represent human ingenuity at work, solving problems one incremental improvement at a time. In a kitchen drawer somewhere, your can opener waits. It's probably unremarkable, a standard rotary design purchased years ago, still functioning perfectly. You might never have thought about its history or design, but collectors and historians look at similar openers and see stories. They see the evolution from violence to elegance, from gap to solution, from absurdity to ubiquity. They see evidence of human progress, preserved in humble kitchen tools. The can opener collection is a monument to the ordinary, and in celebrating the ordinary, it reminds us that most of history isn't made in palaces or battlefields. It's made in kitchens, where tools we barely notice solve problems we've forgotten we ever had. Chapter 10. The drawer where it waits. It's quiet now. In your kitchen, there's probably a can opener. Maybe it's a manual rotary, design the classic style that's been essentially unchanged for over a century. Maybe it's electric, mounted under a cabinet or standing on the counter. Maybe it's one of the modern safety openers that cuts the seal instead of the lid. Tomorrow, you might use it. You'll pull a can from the pantry, soup, beans, tomatoes, something that comes in a metal cylinder. You'll position the opener, engage the cutting wheel, and rotate. Within seconds, the can will be open, ready to heat or pour. You won't think about it. The action is automatic, so familiar it requires no conscious thought. The opener works, the can opens, you proceed with cooking. The entire interaction takes seconds and occupies zero mental space. This mundane convenience is the endpoint of a story spanning over 200 years. From the invention of canned food in 1810 to the development of can openers in the 1850s to the refined designs of today, the journey transformed how humans access preserved food. Think about what that journey included. Decades of hammers and chisels, of violent can opening that risked injury and contamination. The frustration of customers unable to open the cans they'd purchased. The grocers who provided opening services because consumers lacked tools. Think about the inventors. Ezra Warner with his bayonet-like design that was dangerous but revolutionary. William Lyman, who developed the rotary principle that became standard. Countless others who filed patents for improvements, refinements, variations. Think about the military connection. Soldiers in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, all relying on canned rations and the openers that made them accessible. The P-38 openers that thousands of veterans kept for decades as reminders of service. Think about the grocery revolution enabled by accessible canned food, the transformation from daily fresh shopping to weekly pantry stocking, the ability to eat tomatoes in January and peas in March, the convenience that changed cooking and domestic labor. Think about the absurdity of the 50-year gap, the bizarre historical moment when canned food existed, but opening it required tools designed for construction and warfare. The acceptance of this inconvenience because the alternative, spoiled food, was worse. And think about the solution's elegance. The rotary can opener is beautifully designed, simple, mechanical, reliable. It uses leverage and rotational motion to perform what had been a violent task smoothly and safely. It's engineering at its most practical and refined. The story of the can opener is ultimately about problem solving. A new technology, canned food, created a new problem, accessing the food. That problem persisted far longer than seems reasonable. Eventually, solutions emerged and evolved until the problem was comprehensively solved. This pattern repeats throughout history. Innovation creates challenges. Those challenges persist, sometimes for surprisingly long periods. Eventually, further, innovation addresses them. The cycle continues. What problems are we living with now that future generations will find absurdly obvious? What gaps exist in our current technology that seem normal to us but will appear ridiculous in hindsight? We can't know. That's the nature of being embedded in our present moment. But the can opener reminds us that progress is uneven, that obvious needs can go unmet for decades, and that solutions, when they finally arrive, often seem simple enough that we wonder why they took so long. The can opener in your drawer represents all of this. It's a solution to a problem you've probably never consciously considered. It works so well that you take it for granted. Its history is invisible, compressed into a tool so ordinary it attracts no attention. Tomorrow, when you use it, consider the journey. From hammers to rotary openers, to electric automation to easy open cans. From violence to ease. From absurd gap to ubiquitous solution. Consider that for 50 years, people struggled with a problem that your drawer contains the answer to. That thousands of inventors and manufacturers and consumers contributed to refining the tool you'll use without thinking. Consider that opening a can used to be an ordeal